Willowbrook Estates had always been the kind of place where the world seemed to slow down, where mornings carried the sweet scent of blooming flowers and the quiet hum of distant lawnmowers was the only sound that broke the silence. The houses, each with their neat lawns and white picket fences, stood like proud sentinels guarding this suburban haven. I'd lived here for years, my home a simple but comfortable refuge from the chaos of the outside world. But that peace, that serene calm, was shattered one summer morning when an envelope arrived. I opened it without thinking, only to find the signature that would change everything. Samantha Cooper, head of the HOA. What I thought was a trivial warning about a garden fence quickly became the spark that ignited a battle I wasn't prepared for. At first, I didn't even understand what I was reading. A letter from the HOA, citing a violation for an overgrown bush at the corner of my front yard. My first thought, it had to be a mistake. My yard wasn't overgrown. Sure, it wasn't pristine like some of the other places around here, but it was far from a mess. Still, I tried to brush it off. Maybe I had missed a detail or two. I called the number at the bottom of the letter, ready to clear things up. The voice on the other end was calm, almost too calm. It was Franklin Hayes, the HOA's enforcer. He explained the violation again, as if I were a child. But there was something in his tone, something smug that made my gut twist. This wasn't just about a bush. The way he phrased his words, the way he seemed so sure, made me feel like I had no choice but to comply. "You have a week to fix this, or we'll escalate things further," he said. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. I knew the HOA had power here. They could fine you, put liens on your property, or worse. But this felt different. I started to feel like they were coming after me, picking at my small imperfections until they found a way to take control. As I hung up the phone, I had a sinking feeling that this wasn't just about a bush. It was about something bigger, something that would unravel everything I thought I knew about my place in Willowbrook, and I couldn't ignore it. The days that followed felt like a slow burn, the kind that sneaks up on you when you least expect it. I spent hours in the yard, trimming every bush, pruning every tree, trying to meet the HOA's demands, but the feeling of being watched never left. It was as if they were waiting for me to slip, to miss some insignificant detail that would allow them to strike again. But that wasn't the worst of it. I wasn't the only one who noticed the tension. Carla Monroe, my next-door neighbor and a retired teacher, had lived here longer than anyone else. She dropped by one afternoon, holding a plate of cookies with a warm smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Jacob," she said softly, "you've heard, haven't you, about the HOA's crackdown? If you've made it this far and are enjoying the drama of these HOA stories, you're not alone. Don't miss out on the rest of the story. Hit that subscribe button and stay tuned for even more shocking twists." Her voice was laced with concern. Carla had been watching this neighborhood long before I even moved in, and I knew she wouldn't speak up unless she had seen something troubling. "They're not just going after you," she continued, her eyes scanning the street as if she were afraid someone might be listening. "They've started targeting anyone with an excuse, every little violation, every minor flaw. It's getting worse." I could feel the weight of her words settle over me. Carla wasn't one to panic, and if she was this worried, things were more serious than I'd realized. But I wasn't sure what to do with that information. At that moment, it wasn't just about a bush or a fence anymore. It was about the HOA's thirst for power, their need to control everything. And that meant something bigger was coming. Something I couldn't just trim away. The day I decided to confront the HOA head-on, I didn't expect to find anything that would truly rattle me. I thought I was prepared for their usual tactics, threats, fines, maybe even an attempt to get the city involved. But nothing could have prepared me for what I discovered when I walked into the HOA office. The building was nothing special, just a small, nondescript brick structure tucked at the edge of the neighborhood. But as I stepped inside, the air felt thick. Samantha Cooper was there, sitting behind a desk stacked with paperwork. She greeted me with her usual cold smile, but there was something about the way she looked at me, like she already knew what I was going to say. "I'm here to settle this," I told her, trying to keep my voice steady. "This is ridiculous. A bush? Really?" Her smile faltered for a second before returning. "It's not about the bush, Jacob," she said, leaning forward slightly. "You've been warned before. This is about your disregard for the community rules. You've let your property become an eyesore, and we can't allow that." But as she spoke, I caught a glimpse of something. An envelope, one with a familiar city seal on it, tucked under her desk. Curiosity gnawed at me. I wasn't ready to back down, but there was something deeper going on here. Franklin Hayes stepped into the room then, his presence like a shadow over the whole conversation. And that's when it hit me. The HOA wasn't just enforcing rules. They were using legal loopholes to seize homes, manipulate property values, and make deals that would benefit them financially. They were already working with people I didn't know, people who didn't care about the community at all. I wasn't just dealing with a petty neighborhood dispute. I was up against a well-oiled machine. The revelation hit me like a punch to the gut, but it was only the beginning. The truth was staring me in the face. This wasn't a fight I could win by playing by the rules. They'd already stacked the deck in their favor, using every loophole and legal trick they could find to make sure I couldn't escape. I had to do something, and fast. I left the HOA office feeling like I was walking through a fog. Everything seemed more surreal now, like the neighborhood I'd known so well wasn't what it seemed. When I got home, I called Michael, my younger brother. He was a tech whiz, always tinkering with gadgets and software. If anyone could dig up dirt or figure out how they were pulling the strings behind the scenes, it was him. "I think they've got something big planned," I said when he answered the phone. "We need to find out how deep this goes. I need everything: who's involved, what they're doing, and what they're hiding." Michael didn't hesitate. "I'm on it. I'll start pulling records, see if I can track down anything suspicious." Meanwhile, Carla wasn't far behind in offering support. She'd been around the block enough times to know when something smelled fishy. Over the next few days, she kept her ear to the ground, talking to neighbors and gathering whispers of similar complaints from others who were too scared to speak out. Slowly but surely, the picture began to form. A picture of a corrupt system designed to take from the residents and line the pockets of those at the top. But as the pieces came together, I realized the truth was even more unsettling. It wasn't just Samantha or Franklin pulling the strings. It was bigger than that. Much bigger. As the pieces of the puzzle began to come together, it became clear that this fight wasn't going to be as straightforward as I'd hoped. The more I learned about the HOA's operations, the more I realized how deep the corruption ran. It wasn't just about a few bad apples. It was a network of influence that reached far beyond the HOA's office. And that was when I started to realize the full scope of the battle I was up against. One evening, as I was going over some of the information Michael had pulled, the phone rang. It was Mayor Owen Wallace, the man who had been a pillar of Willowbrook for years. I hadn't expected him to get involved, especially not in something like this. But when I picked up the phone, his voice was steady, yet tinged with something I couldn't quite place. "Jacob, I've been hearing rumors. Word on the street is that the HOA is up to more than just enforcing rules. They've been making deals behind closed doors, and I'm not sure where it's all going," he said, his voice low. I wasn't sure how to respond. The mayor, for all his tough exterior, had always been a man of principle, someone who believed in fairness. But now, it felt like he was caught in a web he couldn't escape. "I've seen things," he continued, "and I know who's behind it. But don't be fooled. They've got influence, and they've managed to secure allies in high places. People you wouldn't suspect." I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. I was no longer just fighting for my home. This was a fight for the very soul of Willowbrook. If I wanted to win, I had to be ready for everything: betrayal, lies, and even the possibility that some of my closest neighbors might not be who they seemed. As the tension mounted, I began to question everything I thought I knew about my neighbors and the place I'd called home for so long. It wasn't just about the HOA anymore. It was about trust. Could I still trust Carla? Could I trust Mayor Wallace, who seemed just as tangled in this web as the rest of them? I didn't know who to turn to anymore. One evening, after a long day of digging through records and meeting with people who were too afraid to speak up, I ran into Tessa Doyle, the HOA's lawyer. I hadn't expected her to approach me, but she did. Her gaze was sharp, her posture stiff, but there was something in the way she stood that made me think she wasn't entirely on the other side. "I know what you're doing, Jacob," she said, her voice low, "and I don't think you fully understand the consequences of what you're getting into." I wanted to push her away, to tell her to stay out of my business, but something in her eyes stopped me. She wasn't threatening me, she was warning me. "I've seen the way they operate," she continued, her words deliberate. "They'll use you, twist you into something you're not. You'll be a pawn in their game, and they'll ruin you. If you want to keep your home, you need to back off now." Her words sent a shiver down my spine, but there was something about her that made me pause. Was she trying to manipulate me, or was she truly trying to help? Despite Tessa's warning, I couldn't back down. The more I learned, the more I realized how deep the corruption went. I had to make a choice, keep pushing forward, even if it meant losing everything, or step back and accept the defeat that was waiting for me if I gave up. I wasn't sure which path would hurt more, but there was no turning back. Days later, as I was sifting through more documents that Michael had managed to uncover, I found something that made my blood run cold. It was an email thread between Samantha Cooper and Franklin Hayes, but there was something odd about the message. They weren't just discussing neighborhood rules or fines. They were talking about me. And the more I read, the more it became clear that this wasn't just a personal vendetta. It was part of a larger plan. They were orchestrating the downfall of several homeowners, including myself, using legal loopholes and tactics to bankrupt us. And the worst part, they weren't working alone. The email mentioned several names that made my stomach churn: developers, real estate agents, and even city officials. It seemed that Willowbrook wasn't the suburban paradise I thought it was. It was a battleground for those who held the power to manipulate and control everything, from the homes we lived in to the lives we led. But that wasn't all. In the same thread, there was mention of a secret meeting. A meeting where the HOA was planning to make its final move, the one that would secure their hold over the neighborhood for good. I had to stop it. The walls were closing in, and I knew if I didn't act now, I might lose everything. I knew time was running out, and I had no choice but to make my move. I couldn't do this alone anymore. I reached out to Mayor Wallace, hoping he could use his connections to get a seat at the table in this secret meeting. The mayor's voice was steady on the phone when he picked up, but I could hear the weight of everything pressing down on him. "You're right, Jacob. This isn't just about you anymore," he said, his tone gravely serious. "I've tried to stop this quietly, but they've dug in too deep. But if you want to stop them, you'll need to be at that meeting. We need to show them that we won't back down, that we're not afraid." I could sense his hesitation, but I could also hear the determination in his voice. He wasn't giving up, and neither was I. With the mayor's help, we gathered a small but dedicated group of allies. Carla Monroe, despite her fears, offered her support, rallying some of the other longtime residents who had begun to suspect something was off. Michael worked his magic, digging into city records, finding anything that could prove the HOA's actions weren't just illegal. They were part of a larger conspiracy that spanned decades. Together, we had something that could bring them down. But we were still missing something. Tessa Doyle. She was a wild card, someone whose loyalties remained unclear. She had warned me before, but now there was a part of me that wondered if she was trying to do more than just protect me. Was she working with the HOA, or was she secretly trying to help? It was hard to tell, but as the meeting loomed closer, I couldn't afford to leave any stone unturned. I knew that the next move would be everything. If we couldn't stop the meeting from taking place, the HOA's plan would be set in stone. It was now or never. The night before the meeting, everything felt like it was hanging by a thread. The plan was simple: disrupt the meeting, gather the evidence we had, and expose the corruption before they could finalize their control over Willowbrook. But in the pit of my stomach, I felt the heaviness of the stakes. If we failed, I wasn't just risking my home, I was risking the futures of everyone in the neighborhood. Carla, Michael, and I stood in the dim light of the community center parking lot, waiting for the others to arrive. Mayor Wallace had promised to be there, but there was an air of uncertainty around him, something I couldn't shake. The city's leadership, already swayed by the power of the HOA, had been hesitant to act. I understood that hesitation. Those at the top often had to tread carefully. But now we were no longer dealing with rumors and whispers. We had hard evidence, and I was ready to put everything on the line. Just then, Tessa Doyle showed up. I wasn't sure what to make of her appearance, but her presence sent a chill through me. She approached with her usual reserved demeanor, but there was something different in her eyes, something that spoke of secret knowledge. "I've been working on a few things of my own," she said quietly, her voice low enough that only we could hear. "I've managed to get a copy of the HOA's final proposal. It's not just about seizing homes anymore. They're planning to sell parts of this neighborhood to a private development company. If we don't stop them tonight, it's over." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The HOA wasn't just ruining lives, they were actively destroying the very fabric of Willowbrook, turning it into a commodity to be bought and sold. This wasn't just personal, it was an attack on the community itself. With Tessa's intel, the plan had shifted. We were no longer just fighting for my home, we were fighting for the heart of Willowbrook. The night of the meeting, everything was set. We had the evidence, the witnesses, and a plan to expose the truth. But as the clock ticked closer to the moment of truth, a lingering doubt gnawed at me. I wasn't just up against Samantha and Franklin anymore. I was up against a whole system, a corrupt force that had been festering in the shadows for far too long. What if we were too late? What if they had already made their moves, and we were just too small to stop them? Carla, Michael, and I entered the conference room, heartbeats racing. The meeting was already in progress. Samantha Cooper sat at the head of the table, flanked by Franklin Hayes and a few city officials whose names I had seen in the documents but had never truly known. They didn't see us coming, and for that I was grateful. We needed to catch them off guard. The room fell silent as we walked in, all eyes shifting toward us. I could feel the weight of their gazes, like they were sizing us up, wondering what we were doing there. Without a word, I took a seat at the table. The mayor stood beside me, his presence grounding, but even he seemed on edge. This wasn't just a formal negotiation. It was a battle for control, a struggle for power that had been brewing for years. "Jacob Rivers," Samantha said, her voice dripping with condescension, "I'm surprised you decided to show up. Are you sure you want to do this? You're out of your depth." I didn't flinch. "You think this is about me? This isn't about me, Samantha. It's about the people of Willowbrook. The people you've been exploiting for years." I slammed a folder of documents down onto the table. The room went quiet as I pulled out the damning evidence, emails, contracts, city documents, proof that the HOA wasn't just taking homes, they were destroying the entire community. The tension in the room was palpable. I could see the sweat forming on Samantha's brow, the nervous glances exchanged between her allies. It was now or never. The room was thick with tension as I laid the evidence before them, each document a sharp blow to their carefully constructed facade. The power dynamic had shifted. Samantha, Franklin, and the others were no longer the confident leaders they had once seemed. They were cornered. The realization hung in the air, thick and undeniable. Their empire was crumbling, and they knew it. Samantha's face, usually so composed, twisted into a scowl. "You don't know what you're doing, Jacob," she spat, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and fear. "You think you can expose us, but it's too late. The deals are already in motion. You're just one man. You can't stop this." I looked around the room, locking eyes with each of them. I could see the fear, the crack in their armor. They were scared, and that fear gave me strength. "You've been running this neighborhood like a dictatorship, manipulating everything for your own gain. But you're wrong, Samantha. You're not untouchable, and we won't let you destroy what this community means." The mayor stepped forward, his presence a reminder that this wasn't just about one man fighting for his home. It was about the entire neighborhood. "Jacob is right. This goes beyond legalities. It's about people, and the city will not stand by while you tear Willowbrook apart." Samantha's mask of control shattered. She turned to Franklin, her eyes wide, as if searching for a way out. But it was too late. The damage had been done. The truth was out, and there was no hiding from it now. The doors burst open, and more neighbors filed in. People who had been too afraid to speak up before, but now, emboldened by the truth, ready to take a stand. The balance of power had shifted, and the HOA's grip on Willowbrook was slipping. The room erupted in chaos as the weight of the truth hit the table. Samantha's eyes darted around in panic, but it was too late. The mayor's calm but firm presence stood like a wall between her and her escape. Franklin shot up from his seat, his face flushed with frustration, trying to assert control over the room, but no one was listening anymore. The people of Willowbrook had seen the corruption, and they were done being silent. "You've lost, Samantha," I said, my voice steady, cutting through the rising clamor. The moment I spoke, it felt like everything had come to a standstill. No one dared to move, no one dared to speak. It was as if the room itself had caught its breath, waiting for the final blow. But Samantha wasn't ready to accept defeat. Her face twisted with a mixture of disbelief and rage. "You think this will change anything?" she spat. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. You've only just scratched the surface. I'll destroy you, all of you." I could see the fear in her eyes now, the desperation. The power she once held was slipping from her fingers, and she knew it. Franklin looked like he might try to make a run for it, but the neighbors who had once feared him stood firm. They weren't going to let him get away either. The truth wasn't just an accusation anymore. It was an undeniable force. As the mayor stepped up to the podium, holding up the evidence that exposed their deals, the whole room fell silent once again. "We've had enough," he said, his voice carrying through the tension-filled room. "The community of Willowbrook will not stand by and let you sell it off piece by piece. Your power is over." In that moment, I felt something shift inside me, a weight lifting. The fight had been long, but it had been worth it. Samantha and Franklin were cornered. Their empire was crumbling. As the last of Samantha and Franklin's power crumbled before the eyes of the community, a strange calm settled over me. The fight wasn't over, not yet, but it had reached its tipping point. The truth had been exposed, their secrets laid bare for everyone to see, and the tide had turned in our favor. It was hard to believe, after all the sleepless nights, the constant fear of losing everything, that we had actually won this first battle. But even as Samantha and her allies were escorted out of the room in disgrace, I knew this wasn't the end. The fight had only just begun. The neighbors who had once stood by in silence began to step forward, their faces full of newfound resolve. Carla, with her gentle wisdom, took my arm and gave me a soft, knowing smile. "You did it, Jacob. We did it," she said, her voice full of pride. It was a simple statement, but the weight of it was immense. I looked around the room at all the familiar faces, people who had been too afraid to speak out before, now emboldened by the truth. The community had not only fought for justice, they had fought for the future of Willowbrook. We had come together as something more than neighbors. We had become a force that no one could ignore. But in the quiet moments after the storm, something shifted inside me too. I realized this wasn't just about protecting my home anymore. It was about protecting all of us, the people who had the courage to stand up and fight for what was right. And as I walked out of that room, a deep sense of fulfillment washed over me. I had taken a stand, and in doing so, I had changed Willowbrook forever. If you've ever felt powerless in the face of something bigger than yourself, remember that the power to create change is in your hands. We all have the ability to fight for what's right, even when the odds seem impossible. Don't let fear silence you. Stand up for your community, for your values, and for the truth. If this story resonated with you, share it and subscribe for more stories of courage and resistance.